What's up guys, Asian here again with another build video, and today we're going to be going over the Magicka Nightblade. This is a dual wield Magicka Nightblade build, so we are basically playing within melee range as a Magicka DPS. Now this build, I will not lie to you, does not pull as high as stamina DPS do, so your chances of using this build in a raid are pretty slim, but it does depend ultimately on what your raid lead wants. This build is still very capable of out-parsing many Magicka DPS, and even though it doesn't parse as high as stamina DPS, it still does very respectable numbers, and it does give it some additional provided utility through the use of the Master Architect set, which gives our players, you and two other players, Major Slayer. So if one of your melee DPS doesn't have War Machine and you have this setup, then you might be able to convince your raid lead to put you into the melee spot in order to give your allies Major Slayer. So there is that, but ultimately don't expect to be using this build all too much, but like I said, depends on your raid lead and how comfortable they are and how flexible they are with the members of your group. So like our other build videos, we'll be going over gear, our skill bars, our CP point distributions. We'll be going over things like attributes, race, then we'll talk about a rotation a little bit because it is obviously going to be very different compared to a ranged Magblade build, and then we'll top things off with a 6-man dummy par so you guys can get an idea of the kind of DPS you can pull with this spec. So you can compare this to other Magicka Nightblade builds, you can compare this to other melee Magicka DPS builds, at least in terms of dummy parses. You won't be able to obviously compare this to an in-raid parse. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started with our gear. Now because we are dual wielding, that allows us to use a full 2-piece Monster Helm set. So we are using the new Monster Helm set, Zaan. This is by and far the best single target Monster Helm in the game right now for Magicka DPS. Again, it is tempered by the fact that you need to be within 10 meters in order to get the full effect, but because you're within melee range, because you are dual wielding, that's not going to be too big of an issue, not that big of a hurdle in order to cross. So we're using Zaan. If you don't have access to the DLC, or if you aren't able to clear Vet, Scale, Collar, Peak, then you can use Grothdarr instead. You'll do lower single target DPS, but your cleave will be better with Grothdarr. So you might want to pick up Grothdarr anyways for trash pulls to get that extra AoE damage, and then you swap over to Zaan for the better single target damage when you get to the boss. I do have a health enchant on my helm here, and that's because we are using Witchmother's potent Brew, so I do need that health enchant in order to kind of make up for the loss in health compared to using blue food. For our first 5-piece, we're going with Mechanical Acuity. It is a crafted set from Clockwork City. It requires 6 traits in order to create, and because it is a crafted set, we have some flexibility here when it comes to armor weight. The other set that we're going to be using is going to be Master Architect, which only comes in light. And you do need Master Architect jewelry in order for this build to work, because you can't obviously get jewelry from a crafted set. So whichever 2 pieces of Master Architect armor you manage to get first, you can then craft the remaining Mechanical Acuity pieces. Because Mechanical Acuity is a crafted set, ideally you want to have your heavy chest, then you can basically have a medium helm, shoulder, legs, or feet. They all share the same armor value, so it doesn't matter which one is medium. So that's kind of how you want to play around with it. You still want to get 5 light, 1 medium, 1 heavy for that stat boost from the Undaunted passive, so just keep that in mind when you're playing around with armor weights and you're crafting your Mechanical Acuity set. For our jewelry, we do have to use Master Architect because, again, we can't get jewelry from Mechanical Acuity. We have 3 spell damage enchants. Even though we are a melee Nightblade, we're not using a Flame Staff on our front bar. We still have plenty of sustain, so we are able to use 3 spell damage glyphs instead of a 1 regen glyph. If you do have sustain problems, then you can swap one of these out for a regen glyph if you would like, but 3 spell damage is more than enough to get you by most content. Now for our front bar, we are dual wielding, so we are going to be using swords. This does mean you're going to need to get your dual wield skill all the way up to level 50 in order to get the twin blade and blunt passives. So each sword you have increases your damage done by 2.5%, so with 2 swords we get 5% damage boost. But again, you do need to have level 50 dual wield in order to take advantage of that passive, so that's kind of the downside of also using a Magicka Nightblade in terms of melee build. You do have to level dual wield, and that can take a while to do, so do bear that in mind. If you want to use this build as your primary build, you will have to level dual wield as a Magicka DPS, and that's kind of hard to do. For our main hand, we're going with an infused sword with a flame damage enchant. For our offhand, we're going with an infused sword with a weapon damage enchant, and both of them are Mechanical Acuity. You can also go with Master Architect if you'd like, but I prefer Mechanical Acuity just because it's crafted. Master Architect swords are kind of hard to come by, so you can use either of them. I've pulled pretty similar DPS with both, but I prefer Mechanical Acuity here. Now for our front bar here, instead of infused, you can also go with nirn if you'd like. That does boost your spell damage, but that's kind of up to you. I've pulled pretty similar numbers using infused and nirn, so it's kind of up to you whether you want to have the nirn trait known, or you know somebody who will be able to craft the sword in nirn. If you don't, then you can just go with infused, and you can still pull respectable DPS. For our back bar, we're going with the Maelstrom's Inferno staff, infused with a shock damage enchant. Normally, in a 5/5/1 ranged Magplar or a 5/4/2 ranged Mag Nightblade or 5/4/2 Magblade, we would be using weapon damage enchant, but because that's got obviously here with the sword, we're using a shock damage enchant instead, because so we're not doubling up on our weapon damage enchant. That results in a DPS loss. You can use the lightning staff if you'd like. It's kind of up to you. If you're a dark elf though, Inferno staff is going to be better for DPS. Speaking of race, we are a dark elf, so that's just to take advantage of the Inferno staff back bar. If you're using a lightning staff back bar, then you can go with Altmer instead. It's kind of up to you how you want to play with it. If you do intend on sticking with a ranged Mag Nightblade build as well, then you will want to stay as Dunmer, because you will be using an Inferno front bar, so Dunmer will win out in terms of DPS compared to the Altmer. Two other race choices you have are going to be Bretons and Argonians. Argonians aren't going to be quite as strong as the other three races because they have a lower max Magicka passive boost, but they do have better sustain because whenever they drink a potion they do get resources back, so there is that benefit as well, but ultimately they do pull lower DPS. For our attributes, we have all of our points into Magicka. We have 64 points into Magicka. If you do need some help with survivability, you can shift a couple of points from Magicka into health if you'd like. I personally wouldn't put more than 4 or 5 points into health. That's plenty in order to get up to 17k health. Recommended health threshold for vet trials. But again, that's up to you, how comfortable you feel with the class and how survivable you are. For our Mundus stone, we're going with the Apprentice. You can go with the Lover instead. It all depends on your CPs and your raid debuffs that you get in group. So remember that the penetration cap is 18,200. So if by using the Lover you go over the penetration cap, it's going to be a DPS loss. So you're going to want to use the Apprentice in that case and get the remaining penetration you're missing through something like CP. Otherwise, you should be using the Lover, because that will end up outperforming the Apprentice in that case. But you don't have to use the Lover if you want to. I personally like to stick with the Apprentice and just shift my CP points around in order to make up for that penetration loss. We are using Witchmother's Potent Brew, so we are getting that additional Magicka regen, but our max Magicka and max health do suffer as a result compared to using blue food. You can use blue food if you'd like, but you will be losing out on sustain, and on a melee Magicka Nightblade, you're going to really feel that loss, so you want to stick with Witchmothers if you can. There is a gold food that comes from Clockwork City. You do need to do a series of quests in order to get the recipe. You can't buy that recipe off of guild traders. The recipe is gold. You can buy the food from guild traders. It does require perfect row though, so it is fairly expensive to buy. Don't feel like you need to use it. It's basically a slightly upgraded version of Witchmother's Potent Brew, so slightly better stats, and in addition to some health regen as well. But again, it is expensive, so don't feel like you have to use it. Witchmother's is perfectly fine to use. Now let's go over our bars. Our bars are actually not all that different compared to a ranged Magicka Nightblade. So for our front bar, we have Impale, Funnel Health, Twisting Path, Merciless Resolve, Inner Light, and we have Soul Harvest. This is going to be our primary ultimate of choice. For our back bar, this is where you would have your light armor, your shield, Dampen Magic, or Harness Magicka, whichever one you want to choose. Dampen Magic will give you a larger shield, Harness Magicka will give you a smaller shield, but you do restore Magicka if you get hit by spell damage while your shield is up, so it is better for sustain. I personally prefer Dampen Magic for the additional survivability, but again, that's kind of up to you. I have Elemental Drain here just for the purposes of the parts that we're doing at the end of this video. Crippling Grasp, Blockade of Fire, Siphoning Attacks, Inner Light, and Soul Harvest again. Now, for Crippling Grasp, you can also go with the other morph, which is Debilitate. Debilitate is going to be slightly better for you in terms of AoE, because you can apply to different enemies. Plus, whenever somebody dies when they're affected by it, you do get some Magicka back, so it's nice for sustain. Crippling Grasp is ultimately going to be a little bit better for single target DPS, but the difference is pretty small, so you can pretty much pick whichever morph you prefer. So with all that done, let's go talk about CPs. The CP cap is 720, which means you have 240 points to split across each of the 3 constellation types. Starting with our green CPs, we have 75 into Arcanus and 75 in Tenacity, which leaves 90 points, which you can put across the other remaining nodes however you'd like. Kind of depends on which sort of passives you want from which constellation specifically. I have 31 to Shadow Ward, 31 to Tumbling, and 28 into Warlord, but like I said, you can kind of play around with it and get different passives if you would like. For our blue CPs, a little bit of a disclaimer here, this is optimized for my specific raid groups. We only get infused Torg's Crusher, so we do not get Alkosh, or tanks don't run Alkosh at all. So that's why I have 42 points into Spell Erosion, because like I mentioned earlier, I don't like to use the Lover, I like to use the Apprentice instead, so I stick with this many points into Spell Erosion. I have tried with Lover and less points into Spell Erosion, and I still pull about the same DPS, so it doesn't quite matter to me which setup I go with. Now if you do need to swap out CP points, I do recommend if you're on PC to pick up the Constellations add-on as well as Combat Metrics. What you're going to want to do is basically you're going to want to take a parse, preferably one from a raid, so you do have some raid buffs along with you, but it can be a dummy parse if you'd like. Hit Combat Metrics import when you have that report up, and it'll automatically import all the relevant statistics that it needs. You will need to manually input your spell penetration though, that's the only one that it will not automatically import. You swap over to the Champion Points tab here, you hit Calculate, and it'll tell you under this new column what your CP point distribution is going to be for your specific parse. So you might want to do several parses here just to get a kind of an idea of where you should be putting your points, but this is how you would get your optimal CP setup. I have 42 into Spell Erosion, 49 to Elemental Expert, 56 into Elfborn, 66 into Master at Arms, 16 into Staff Expert, and 11 into Thaumaturge. And now finally for our red CPs, I like to go with a one-size-fits-most scenario setup, but depending on the content you're running, you might want to shift some points around. A good example of this is Maw of Lorkhar. You're going to be taking a lot more magic damage as well as direct damage from Maw, so you're not going to want to put as many points into Hardy. You're going to want to shift points out of Hardy into Elemental Defender, Spell Shield, and Ironclad, but you don't have to do it if you don't want to. It does cost 3k gold every time you want to swap your CP points around, and it does start to add up if you raid a lot like I do. So that's why I like to take this one-size-fits-most approach. 48 into Ironclad, 48 into Thick-Skinned, 1 into Light Armor Focus, 56 into Hardy and Elemental Defender, and 31 into Bastion. I like to keep 31 points into Bastion for these two passives. So Field Physician reduces the damage you take while you're resurrecting somebody, and this does carry over to the damage your shield takes, so that's very useful when you are rezzing somebody. And then Infusion, which boosts the magic regen of a person you resurrect. Boosts the magic regen by 797 for 8 seconds. It's very useful when you res Magicka DPS, healers, and tanks. It helps them get the resources back faster, which means they're be able to get back in the fight a lot quicker that way. You don't have to do as many heavy attacks in order to get your resources back. So now that we've managed to get all of the build stuff done, let's go ahead and talk about our rotation, because it is going to be slightly different compared to a ranged Magicka Nightblade. Primarily in our use of the ultimate, so we're not obviously going to be able to use the Elemental Rage ultimate. You can replace your ultimate on your back bar with Elemental Rage if you'd like. Looks like I am lagging. I'm trying to bar swap and it's not doing it for me. So it looks like we are lagging. There we go. Ooh, that lag spike. That lag is fantastic right now. I'm not able to bar swap right now. There we go. Okay. I just did like 20 bar swaps all at once. So like I said, you can use the Elemental Rage ultimate on your back bar if you'd like, for the additional cleave damage if you'd like. Wow, this lag is actually quite bad right now. I'm not sure if we'll be able to get a good reading on our 6-man dummy parse until this lag has kind of figured itself out. The game might actually kick me, that's how bad this lag is. I'm not even sure if I'm still in game or not. Okay, apparently I am because I'm still bar swapping. Okay, so the rotation itself isn't actually that much different from a ranged Magicka Nightblade. You still want to maintain all your buffs, obviously, so Merciless Resolve, Siphoning attacks, and all that stuff. You're still doing a dynamic rotation. You are prioritizing your bow procs above all else. The only difference really is going to come from your ultimates. So basically, instead of using your Elemental Rage ultimate, you're going to be using Soul Harvest. So you are playing at melee range, so you will want to be staying within melee range, and then just use Soul Harvest whenever you get it up. So if you saw the 551 video, the Acuity video, it's going to be very similar to that. The only difference is you're not playing at range for most of the fight, you're just playing at melee range the entire time. So your rotation is basically going to look like this. Obviously you're going to buff up first, and I like to open it up with an ultimate. So currently on Dragon Bones, there's currently a slight delay when it comes to the bow proc, but you don't have that delay with swords. So you can see here, you can go from 4 straight into bow proc if you'd like. I was a little bit too fast on that, so that's why it didn't work. Let me try again. So you can see here, you can go straight into light attack into bow proc with your dual wielding. Can't quite do that right now on live with the staff attack because there is a slight delay. We're not entirely sure what's happening here. We think it's due to using a ranged weapon because we do also see this delay with bow, with using a bow on a stamina nightblade. So that might be the reason why, but we're not 100% sure about that. So basically, that's what the rotation looks like. It's very dynamic. Again, you want to buff up. Lay down your dots, and you want to use something like Surrender or Action Duration Reminder to keep track of your buffs. Prioritize your bow procs here. Let me see if I can do an example here. You can see here I have 4, I go to 5, and then just go back to my back bar to finish off my rotation on my back bar. So that's what I mean when I say you're prioritizing your bow proc. So if you're putting down Blockade like right now, and I have 4, I swap my front bar, get the bow proc off, and continue reapplying my dots on my back bar. So you're going to be doing a lot of bar swapping during this rotation. And again, you want to use your Soul Harvest ultimate as soon as it pops up. Now, so one thing you want to keep note of is when you want to use your potion. So if you use your ultimate or rather when your ultimate activates and you have your potion up, make sure to use the ultimate first and then drink your potion, because you will get ultimate back when you drink your potion. So you don't want to, drink your potion, get up to 91 ultimate and then use your ultimate, because you could have used your ultimate, drink your potion, and get up to 20 ultimate immediately after you use your ultimate. So do be mindful of that. If you do happen to get in that situation where your ultimate just comes up and your potion is also up at the same time, hold off on using your potion, use your ultimate, and then drink it again. So now that's all that said and done, it looks like the lag spike is finally gone. We're going to go ahead and do a 6 million dummy parse to get you an idea of what you can expect to pull with this build. So again, you will be able to compare this with dummy parses, 6 million dummy parses with Magicka Nightblade builds. You won't be able to compare this with an in-raid parse, obviously, because we're not getting raid buffs. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. I like to start off with an ultimate. You don't have to though. That is a little bit of lag there. So I was missing my light attacks because of that lag. I don't think it'll affect our parse too badly because we are pretty early in the parse. You will have to get a little bit used to the timing of your light attacks with the swords, because it is a different timing compared to staves. Just from my experience, it's a little bit faster. So I kind of made a mistake there. I should use my ultimate and then the bow proc. See here, I want to use my ultimate and then drink my potion. We are in execute now. So for execute, I just like to keep up path and blockade as well as siphoning attacks and Merciless. We aren't going to be using the bow proc, and I'll explain why when we take a look at our combat metrics report. So we are seeing that lag spike there. So we were having lag spike issues there, so this parse is not quite as good as the other parses that I have done. I've managed to actually pull around 37 to 38k with this build here, but again, we had a lot of lag issues, so a lot of my light attacks weren't being registered, and there was a lot of lag between abilities, so we were missing a lot of bow procs there. So we pulled 34.8, 34.9k, we can round this up a little bit, on this dual wield build. So this is pretty comparable to what a lot of Magicka DPS are currently pulling, but like I said, because of that lag, I just wasn't able to pull the numbers that I normally pull. I will put a link down in the description below when I don't have as much lag, and kind of show you guys the highest parts that I've managed to get. I actually think I have it saved somewhere, either on a Discord or on my actual screenshots folder of the best parts I managed to do with a dual wield build. But again, let's go ahead and quickly look over our parts. So we can see here our regen versus drain per second doesn't actually take a hit even though we're dual wielding. And that's partially because Magicka Nightblades just have very, very good sustain compared to other Magicka classes. So the dual wield doesn't really quite affect it as badly. So I was talking about Assassin's Will versus Impale during Execute. This isn't a very good example here, but you can see here that Assassin's Will and Impale both do about the same DPS, more or less. Assassin's Will does have a longer animation compared to Impale though, so you're able to get more Impales off in a given period of time compared to Assassin's Will procs, so that's why we're using Impale instead of Assassin's Will. You can use bow procs during Execute if you'd like. You can see here it kind of varies. Sometimes your Assassin's Will proc crit for higher than Impale does, but it ultimately kind of depends on different things, different variables and things like that. But generally speaking, Impale will do a little bit more DPS than Assassin's Will during Execute. So you can see here everything else pretty much falls in line, pretty much how we would expect it to kind of fall. You can see though, even our light attacks aren't doing that badly in terms of DPS. It does about 5% of our DPS. So it's not a terrible, terrible source of DPS, although everything else pretty much beats it out. So this is a very unique, not necessarily unique, but it's a very interesting build, a very fun build, kind of change things up if you're kind of bored with the standard 5-4-2 setup with the Magicka Nightblade. So that's it for this build video. I hope you guys found it informative, and I will see you guys in the next dungeon.